Welcome to Our Stories Matter, We Will Dance Again. I'm Susie Hess, joined by my co-host Mary Barr Halpern. This season, we're diving into stories of Jews, Arabs, and Christians, stories of hope and resilience during times of war. In this compelling episode, we are joined by Dr. Yehudah Pryce, whose life journey embodies resilience and transformation. As a Black Orthodox Jew, Dr. Pryce shares his powerful story of navigating identity and the intersection of race, faith, and justice, from his time within prison walls to finding spiritual sanctuary at the Wailing Wall. He offers profound insights into combating anti-Semitism, drawing from his lived experiences and scholarly expertise to recommend strategies for fostering understanding, inclusivity, and allyship. From the conversation with Yehudah, the piece that continues to stick with me is that he has experienced more anti-Semitism than racism. Yeah, that part was mind-blowing to me. And you know what I really appreciate about Yehudah is that he's really using his voice to educate and help others, and using his vulnerability and lived experiences in such a genuine way. I mean, talk about vulnerability. Yes, and we hope you'll find this conversation helpful as you continue to dialogue with folks. Welcome, Dr. Pryce. I'm so happy to have you on this side of the podcast now.
So happy to be here. I definitely appreciated my time on that side of the podcast. I am sure I'll appreciate it on this side as well, especially since we're talking about such a pertinent thing going on right now, so salient to many Jews' lives. And so it should be at least so salient to so many social workers' lives.
Yes, I hope so. Can you maybe start by telling us where you were on October 7th?
Okay, October 7th. I practice Orthodox Judaism, or what I like to say is I carry on the indigenous tradition that started in Eretz Israel and has been meticulously handed down from generation to generation. I practice that. So I don't necessarily even reference it as simply October 7th. It's more so to the corresponding Hebrew calendar that has our sort of events. And that day wasn't simply a random October 7th. It was Simchas Torah, which is the end of Sukkot. It's the end of our holiday. It's the ending days of it. And it's actually what we call the sort of season of our happiness, of our joy. So it was really a joyous occasion where I was at my synagogue with the local community. And for the majority of us, if you're practicing it traditionally, you don't have access to your cell phone or any sort of emails or any sort of news. And we are just kind of connecting with our tradition and God and our community at the synagogue. And we were enjoying ourselves, and then sort of trickling in of news. Yes, we have traditional practices. It doesn't mean we don't have security guards or other people who might not be as observant. And they were kind of feeding us sort of information of what was going on. In retrospect, I mean, it was hard to kind of fathom what was actually happening, because when we actually found out the full truth, which was after the holiday ended, after the day ended, we were in horror. But before that, we just heard it was a terrorist attack. They took some hostages. We don't know how many, right? And so just bits and pieces. So we're already imagining, like, when we started hearing hundreds, and it just seemed like, wow, like something so significant happened. And yet, in order to kind of practice our tradition and carry it on, we're supposed to be cultivating feelings of joy and happiness right now. There was sort of it was conflicting, right? Like, unimaginable tragedy is going on, and yet you are supposed to cultivate joy and happiness. And not only that, some of the rabbis spoke about, like, nobody's imagining that you can just kind of quiet this part of your brain from trying to question and wonder what's going on. But I feel like this is me channeling the rabbi, that them saying that I feel that the Jewish response is not to run away from who we are and our tradition during these times of crisis when people who hate Jews are looking to attack, but it's to connect through our tradition. That's how we've done through countless tragedies that have appeared throughout history. That's what we need to do. So we tried to the best of our ability. That's what I tried to do, and try to connect to that, also knowing that the other shoe would drop, so to speak, once the holiday ended at night and we were able to have access to our phones and the internet. Yeah, so that's where I was when the news first broke. And I was with my wife in our home shortly after we made Havdalah, which separates the holiday from the regular week, the regular secular week. And we went to our phones, and we were just in utter shock, utter horror, like the sort of sadness, the sort of hurt, the sort of anger that all kind of coalesced together. It was a surreal experience. Not only that, like connecting it with all the sort of historical examples of Jewish tragedy. This was our Jewish tragedy that our generation had to encounter. And little did I know that the Jewish people weren't going to be allowed to simply process the experience and mourn, because like literally the next day, many parts of the world, in particularly in America, quickly put us on the defensive.
Oh, 100%. This is one of the things that we talked about quite often, is that we were denied the ability to grieve. We kind of like stayed with what just happened and the state of shock without the ability to move forward to the sadness and the grief. And, from what you're saying, I had a few thoughts. One of them was, you're describing the Jewish tradition where you go from sadness to happiness to sadness to happiness, which is something we constantly do, right? When I think about it, in Israel, for example, you honoring the Israeli Memorial Day for people who were killed in the war and terrorist attack. And the end of the day, within those 24 hours later, you celebrate Independence Day. And it's like this constant back and forth, this dialectic, I think, of Jewish people, of being able to hold sadness and joy, grief and hope at the same time, which I think, in my opinion, makes us somewhat resilient. I mean, I think this is a dialectic, being able to have both sides of it. But the other thing you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, you knew it was coming on Simchat Torah when the news started trickling. You knew the sadness is going to come, and how much mindfulness is needed to be able to stay in the moment and try to celebrate the holiday with all its meaning before the shoe is going to drop. Like, that takes a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you mentioned that. It takes a lot in this moment, but like historically speaking, it's taken a lot for Jews for thousands of years, right? Like, where we have to actively sort of cultivate some sort of mindfulness of connecting us to God, to us, to our people, to our history, to the moment, while unbelievable tragedies just continue to occur. Like, I think it's a testament to resilience, and it's a testament to, I mean, I think it's indicative of, or not indicative of, but at least allows the questioning to, what does intergenerational trauma look like for the Jewish people, right? Like, what does that look like? And I guess I will add another layer to it, right? Because as I mentioned, when we mentioned October 7th, we're not just simply talking about October 7th. We're talking about what happened afterwards. If that was one thing, we would be talking about how the Jewish people managed to heal and build and move on, and how are we trying to grapple with the things connected to that. But literally a day later, anti-Semitism seemed to rise at a rate that was unprecedented, right? Especially at least in America, at least in contemporary society. And that's kind of crazy, right? Like, the most horrific slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. And that's what we're referencing, right? We have to literally reference the Holocaust, right? And then later, after another horrific genocidal action happens, the Jewish people were on the defensive, because whether it's college campuses, whether it's protests, whether it's online forums, whatever it is, like, people are rising to blame Jews, right? The Jews are at fault, this, right? And this boggles. October 7th for me was the beginning of the realization, or maybe it's the crystallization of me realizing that Jews can't just feel safe. We can't. We have to be on guard.
Wow. You said so many important things. So I was raised to always be on the lookout, that you never know what's going to happen. And I always thought, because my dad read every single book from World War II, like, more than once. And he would always be saying, like, be careful and, don't let anyone know. And, I'm obviously doing the opposite of being a loud and proud Jew now, but I was raised to be in hiding because it's not safe. I just didn't think that what he experienced, I would experience as well. And so then, because I know you from USC, as you were the chair of Unchained Scholars, so students who were formerly incarcerated, and then you continue to do so many amazing things, like monthly, it seems like. But my question for you, what has it been like? And I've been watching your social media also, from the prison walls to the Wailing Wall. Like, what was that experience like for you? Because I think of, obviously, prison is one piece, and then the dissonance out here of all the hatred, and all of my colleagues, or just a lot of colleagues and activists, friends, are no longer my friends. And then I went to Israel where I met Miri, and it was the sadness meets resilience, the fear and the joy. So for you, what was it like from prison walls to the Wailing Wall?
Good question. So I imagine you're speaking about my first trip to Israel, right? And when I actually went to the Western Wall, right? The Wailing Wall, it was unimaginable, right? When I was in prison, I encountered my first rabbi in Pelican Bay State Prison in 2010, and I wasn't released from prison in 2018. And not until then could I start a formal sort of Orthodox Jewish conversion program. I was in this sort of like, I don't know, neither world or whatever you want to call it, this in-between world where I connected to an identity that I couldn't fully actualize for so many years in a place where identity, right? Racial politics, like fully define the reality that somebody's incarcerated lives in, right? You have to deal with these sort of politics and navigate it. So me connecting to an identity that I couldn't fully be, right? And only dreaming and imagining. And then part of that identity, right? When I talk about the sort of indigenous religious practices and traditions that arose from Eretz Yisrael and has been meticulously handed down was our connection, right? For me, I prayed 3 times a day as Jews have prayed for thousands of years to return to Eretz Yisrael, right? To the land of Israel, to Jerusalem specifically. It was abstract, right? What does that mean? I'm praying for something that I've never seen, but I long for, right? I long for, and I pray with real feelings for, as so many other Jews have, and to get there. And first to be greeted as a brother. I'm not comparing countries and different sort of situations, but I've never been greeted or received in such a way in America than I have in Israel. This warm embrace, I felt like I belonged, right? I felt like I belonged, right? And that was just amazing a feeling to go to, if you know my life, it has been a struggle with identity. It's been a struggle with racism. It's been involved in actual race wars, right? If we're talking about prison, we're talking about what comes with that, and right. And to be at a place where it doesn't matter necessarily what you look like. That doesn't mean anybody has their sort of individual experiences, and there's not any sort of individual people with prejudices and like you'll find any other place in the world. But my personal lived experience of going to Eretz Yisrael, to being in the land of Israel, was me being embraced, and then me approaching, he said, the Kosel, the Wailing Wall, where we call it Wailing, is so many Jews for thousands of years have poured out tears and their aspirations and their hopes at this wall that is not the wall of the temple. It's not that, but it's the closest we can get. And so we're going to be and gravitate towards the closest place we can get that connects us to God, to our history, to at the end of the day, who we are intrinsically. And I got there and I was overcome with emotion and to know that one, I share a common destiny with my people, right? And it's there. And to know that my hopes and my aspirations and my longings and the work and the sort of rehabilitation that I had to do in the process, the prejudice and the racism, everything that I've experienced brought me to a place where I feel I belong and I'm connecting here at this focal point. It's a focal point of so many other religions because there's something inherently special right there. Billions of people recognize that. It's not just me, billions of people, if we think about sort of other religious traditions that sprung up out of our indigenous religion. You feel it all there. And I felt that. I felt overcome with emotion. And to this day, even thinking about it, even when I pray, I could visualize that experience so much more now. And it's kind of like we pray. Does this work? We could think about it if you're not religious. If you think about it, if you have such mindfulness and this focused intention, how that can, does that work? Is it just something that therapists use to motivate clients, right? Are self-help gurus? No, I mean, it worked for me, right? It was real for me. And that experience was one of the most realist, impactful experience that I've ever had. And to manifest my ideas, my thoughts and hopes, and to be there and experiencing it, it just makes me so much hopeful for other things that I approach in that same sort of way. And maybe the arc of Jewish history as well.
I want to zoom into one of the things you mentioned, which is you were greeted as a brother. A lot of people don't know that Israel is diverse, that there are people of color in Israel, that, there is a big diverse population, that the Jews are not all white. And I love the fact that your first experience there was so positive because there is racism and there is other stuff like in any other country. But the fact that you felt that sense of belonging, I love that. And it's amazing. And I'm wondering if we can tie that so I don't know a lot about you like Susie, but when you think about your upbringing, how does your specific upbringing influence your understanding of identity specifically as we think about your Jewish and Black heritage together?
Good question. Identity has played a big part in my upbringing. I was raised by, my mother she immigrated from Sri Lanka. She was raised Muslim with her 9 siblings. My dad was raised Baptist Christian in Jamaica. He immigrated over here. So I'm first generation American. That's part of my identity. It differs, right? Because the American Black experience is different from the Jamaican Black experience, right? And I've seen that just in the sort of conversations and dialogue that I've had with my father. And then I remember my mother divorcing my father at the age of, I was age 2. I don't know if I necessarily remember that moment, right? But my mom, they divorced too, and my mom remarried a white man. Now, what that did and the sort of what that led to is there were certain elements in people. This wasn't everybody and every person, but when you're an adolescent, you sometimes blow things out of proportion in your small social world and think this person who's critical of me, their opinion is much more than that, and it represents in a reality or whatnot. And I remember there was some Black people who said I wasn't Black enough because, oh, I have white siblings and I have a white dad, and that matters, apparently, right? To say whether I was Black enough. And then I had egregious anti-Black racism when there was white youth in my neighborhood that would chase after me, call me the N-word, would say it in front of my house, would circle with their bikes in front of my house. And I remember, like, I just want to fit in. Like, I don't want to stick. That's all I want. I'm not asking for equality. I'm not asking for fairness. I'm just literally don't want to stick out. Because at the end of the day, why is me existing a problem for other people, right? I can't change my Blackness. There's no amount of education. There's no amount of achievements. There's nothing that's going to change that. And that seems to be an issue. And it seems to be a problem for everybody. Regardless of if I care about it or not, other people care about it. And that kind of affects my sort of social experiences. So that was one aspect of it, which is kind of weird, though, that I struggle with this identity. I found belonging in an identity amongst gang members, right, who kind of welcomed me in. And so I found that, and I found a sense of power, a sense of agency, and I didn't have to worry about abstract success decades down the line. If I go to school and I go to college and then I work and then I family and all this other stuff, I could get power, respect, and I could be seen and I could belong right then. And then me going to prison as somebody who feels secure in my identity, and me all of a sudden encountering a rabbi and feeling connected to a Jewish identity without a Jewish community to support and reinforce that identity. And in a position where most Jews there, they could be perceived as white presenting. I'm using this for sake of brevity. I don't believe Jews are white, and I believe that it is a mark of white supremacy and imperialism, maybe ideological colonialism to even suggest that Jews should somehow adopt America's color-coded social constructs and graft that onto their identity because...
Thank you. Oh my God, dude. For saying that. Every time it sounds like you literally telling me I'm white, and so you know that I get like my blood, just like I am Middle Eastern. I'm olive. I can pass as white, and that by itself is complicated.
For sure, it's complicated, and it's that much more complicated in prison when everything matters by what you look like. So you're gonna have to, if you're white, are you perceived to be white? You're gonna have to have to associate with the white car, right? Vroom vroom. That's how, right? Which is the Peckerwood car, wood car, however you do it. We're talking about California prisons, and they typically, because of the hierarchy works in prison, the more violent you can be, the more power and influence and leadership sort of positions you'll be put in. Those happen to be skinheads. So imagine you identify, like, I'm Jewish. Everybody says I'm white, so I'm operating or associating with this car. But the people who are in charge of it would hate me and my identity if I expressed it. So I have an identity that I have to hide. Right? That's its own complication. Yes, and I don't like we're not playing Oppression Olympics when we're talking about the different sort of oppressions people must contend with. We're just stating what the different sort of things people have to contend with. Like me as a licensed clinical social worker, that helps me understand how to address a problem by knowing the stuff we have to contend with, right? And so that comes off different from somebody. And my wife mentioned this before, right? One time she mentioned, she said, sometimes I just wish I was black. What does she mean by that? She didn't literally mean like, hey, I don't like how I look. I want to be black, right? She was born Jewish, but she said there's so many times that she said like, if you're black, you kind of know if people are racist, but they're just not going to mess with you. You're going to understand the racism and prejudice at the get-go. It's not going to come out later. She said with her, there were so many times that friends found out she was Jewish, and that completely changed the dynamic of how they felt about her, the relationship and all that. So she's like, man, I just, that's like to her, it was like, it was sort of a worse feeling. Like I would have just avoided you to begin with, then opened up, my feelings and connection with you just to kind of feel like I'm betrayed for nothing I did, nothing for my people truly did, right? But just intrinsically, because you knew who I intrinsically was, I'm Jewish, and that was enough, right? And so prison makes that dynamic a lot harder. Though if I could pause real quick just to connect back with that idea, I do think it's a mark of racism when people try to force Jews only to be white or Israel to only be a white state for a host of reasons, right? It seems, if anything, they're uplifting that sort of white supremacy dynamic because they can only see in the terms of white, or they give more precedence to white. We know that the population, I don't use this term necessarily, are people of color, right? The majority of the population of Israel, right, are people of color. So to use that and say it's a white, that just like totally just... Why are you lifting up what essentially would be the minority of people to be the majority, and that's all you care about? That says something to what you give precedence to, right? Not only that, if it was so racist, do you know the number one place that African Americans immigrate to, number one country? It's Israel, right?
I love that. Most people have no idea about that.
Of course, because these are narratives and things told about Israel that you would not know about, right? Get into different sort of narratives about that. But yeah, so this played. So I'm in prison now, right? My identity of me saying, you know what, I'm gonna wear a kippah, I'm gonna wear a yarmulke, right? Which is a connection. One, it recognizes that there's a higher power and there's a respect, and that it's watching, and you're using that to say that, yes, I am humble and I'm submitting to that. But also it connects you with other Jews, right? It's an identifying marker, right? You see another kippah, I see another yarmulke, connects with other Jews. So when I did that, I really kind of like showed my identity of who I wasn't identifying with. In that sort of racial dynamics, it's not an easy thing to do, right? But I had the wherewithal to say that I'm not connecting to it for mere purposes of identity that are on the surface level, right? What do you look like, right? But I'm connected to this meticulously handed down tradition that has governed and formed Jewish identity and caused thriving Jewish communities in the face of persecution. I'm connecting to this Masorah, this tradition. And to me, I could deal with this sort of identity limbo, wanting to be Jewish, can't be Jewish, because I think I'm connected to this emes, to this truth, to this tradition that I know works. And I know it works so well that it actually influenced billions of people. Again, referencing that. And then getting out in the world and seeing how the sort of dynamics that comes up now, right? I converted, I'm a Jew, I'm fully Jewish, I'm 1,000% Jewish, you know how we work, but yet you don't just simply stop being black, right? It's not like, all right, I'm not black, y'all, so just, right? Because again, American blackness is fundamentally very much in part a social construct based on our historical experiences and the things that's gone on in America, particularly. So, and sometimes I think you can cultivate an identity in both, right? Because to be black is just to be black in America, right? And that could come out in different ways, right? Because there's not a universal way to be black. There's different sort of, just like if you go to Africa, there's different sort of tribes, there's different sort of cultures within that. You wouldn't say everybody's the same, right? So I could connect with the historical experience of what my experience, and on a real level, even if I'm talking about racism, me walking down the street and people crossing the street, right? That's a black thing that's happening to me, right? That's egregious black racism as I experience, is that, or me feeling, maybe there's different sort of social pressures, me feeling the need to smile. I swear I don't smile for y'all just because of this, but I'm saying the need to smile in certain situations because I could feel that I'm intimidating people, right? Or my normal sort of resting face causes people to be on guard. And if I smile, I put people at ease. And that's like, that shouldn't necessarily be my job or a consideration for that, right? But this is my sort of black experience that I have to experience. And then my Jewish experience is dealing with people claiming to understand what it means to be a Jew, or what being a Jew is, or what anti-Semitism is, because they want to do that. They want to tell me that this is anti-Blackness and this isn't. And if you're telling me this is anti-Blackness, I'm not going to, I'm not going to hear you. I know best, right? Like nobody's going to do that. But for Jews, it's socially accepted to do that. And then what do I do when there's tensions between communities, right? When the Kanye West situation happens, right? When the Kyrie Irving situation happens, right? What do I do? Because I got this two parts of my identity together. And how do I deal with that? Am I betraying one over the other if I do? So identity, right? I guess my identities help me understand intersectionality to in a deep sense, and understanding that it matters to whether you can even reconcile or solve that. I don't think it's so much about that. It's just the understanding of what people have to contend with that helps us to be able to support them. And I think my experience as being Black and being Jewish leads me to that sort of understanding with other people, that sort of empathy with other people. And as I tell clients so much, right? Yes, it's great to have empathy for others, but we're allowed to have, compassion for ourselves, right? And so it allows me to also think in terms of having compassion for myself, because holding multiple identities in a time where people might hate particular identities or there's a lot of racism and prejudice and things in the world is a tough thing to do. So I have to have compassion for.
I love that so much. And, I totally can identify with your wife. I totally get what she was saying, because I was just carrying on with my life. And until October 7th happened, so I was, with a lot of quote unquote feminists, me too, unless you're a Jew. And when I made a statement to an activist who is an self-identified feminist, I said, I just cannot believe what's happening to the women. And I can't even imagine what's probably happening to the men. This was like October 8th, 9th, 10th-ish. Yeah. She started making statements about from the river to the sea. And then I said, that is a harmful sentence. And I said, I'm a Zionist. And she said, I don't know how to feel about that. And we never spoke again. And so my shock, your wife is like, we're always shocked. We're shocked. Because on the outside, I am white presenting. Now that also pissed someone else off because they're like, you are not white presenting, you're white. And I said, well, white people don't think I'm white. And so there is a nuance in there that people are not really grasping. And so when I think of social justice, and I think of you as just an incredible activist, how would all of your experiences as someone who was formerly incarcerated, Jewish, a Black man, how does that shape your work within mental health and social justice? Because you really have all the intersections.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of intersections. And I think, just kind of connecting it with what I was mentioning earlier, right? I think it opens my eyes to different sort of experiences. And now that I know that I'm so misunderstood, right? It's almost like people are going out of their way to try to misunderstand me, right? Or the Jewish people and all that, right? How we talk about in terms of cultural competency and cultural humility, cultural competency being the sort of idea that we can really be competent of understanding another person's culture if we just get enough education, and cultural humility, maybe, it's an ever learning process, and maybe it should be more, the attitude is more of a curious orientation, right? Learning and being open and being receptive to other people's experiences and seeing how that possibly may show up. And also understanding that people are not the same within a group. Everybody's experience and lived experience, or however we think about it, does not operate the same within that sort of group. So me lifting that up and trying to understand what people are experiencing, I think that has been more real for me. I feel that now, and I feel that it's needed. It's needed in the work we do. Because I think for a lot of us, even we're coming from sort of Western mindsets of what it means to be okay and what does well-being look like, and what that very well may work for somebody that's operating in that particular sort of framework as well, right? But people come from all types of different frameworks. And I understand this even more so is because I've been trying and failing to explain what is Jewish identity. And what does it mean? What does it mean to be an indigenous people? What does it mean to be a sort of ethno-religion that I feel that I don't even like those terms because I'm using other people's terms to define something that was just what it was. So many indigenous peoples, right, have a land-based religion that the identity is connected to, and you can't separate it. You don't say a Native American, well, we're just going to just separate them from any connection to America, and they exist without that. You'd be like, no, it's a land-based, right? So it just allows me to start operating or understanding or being receptive and open to other people's sort of frameworks. Again, empathy. I think that's the key ingredient to so much of society is empathy, real empathy. Because to your point, those feminists didn't have empathy for Israeli Jewish women, right? This happened before people can use the excuse of quote unquote genocide, which is not happening, but before they could pretend or use that as justification for what is clearly a bias in them, right? This was happening already. I look at my old posts before the claims of genocide and all that. They just immediately pivoted into oppression. And I'm like, no, first of all, no, I don't remember, the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans waging, genocidal wars against other people because they're oppressed by the Chinese government, right? Oppression doesn't lead to evil. There's not just a positive correlation, right? And so again, true empathy, right? True empathy. And if you're not practicing true empathy, then you're not really practicing peace. You're not really practicing social justice, right? You're just practicing whatever you're practicing, and all the good you're practicing, you're still practicing something that allows room for hate to thrive.
I mean, we interviewed a lot of people. Most of them are actually not from the mental health field, but to see what's happening in the mental health field where we're being taught to listen and raise empathy and compassion and see the other side. And now there's this new idea of liberation therapy. And, it's almost like if you're Jewish, you don't deserve to have care. You don't deserve your feelings that don't matter because you're evil. And it's awful. I mean, what's happening in Facebook groups, what's happening in college campuses, in the way they're teaching, Susie, you know that more than everybody, right? Like what's happening on campuses in the social work school and psychology. It's insane to me.
It's insane. But again, we're a small minority if we just think about it, right? And it's so much easier for other sort of groups to have their voice be louder. And if you're thinking about it as just I don't know, I don't want to say convenience level, but if you're thinking about it just like if you're in administration or you're whatever, right? You're just thinking about, all right, what's going to cause the most waves? All right, I could ignore the small group of people and focus on this big thing. Perhaps, I don't know. I do know. I remember thinking about what Barry Weiss said in terms of anti-Semitism and how it kind of different, and it acts as a sort of grand unified theory that explains everything. So what allows, so you could, if we just use the Jews for this, they use critical theory as a grand unified theory, but we all know that in a postmodern world, we're actually supposed to be suspicious of grand unified theories, right? That's kind of what we're supposed to do. We say it in one hand, right? Oh yeah, a lot of these sort of grand unified theories, different thing, they just were in power and they're able to kind of get their views across, and that's why, right? But no, there's different points of views, there's different understandings, right? But people have allowed that this anti-Semitism, which you mentioned mental health, I almost see it as a sort of mental health illness. I usually, when I'm in my more strength-based perspective, I talk about it as mental health challenges. I'm just going to say this is a mental health illness, right? Because I see people just almost possessed, right? Possessed by an inability to even reason or hold space for another human being. And that almost so much injustice happens when you have the inability to hold space for another sort of human, for their humanness, for their human experience, whether you agree with it or not, right? Whether you agree with it or not. And I see that happening. And it's just scary because it's not just feminists. It's not just social work. It's not just therapists, right? It's not just academia. We're seeing it everywhere. It's so pervasive. And it makes you think like, what's next? What's next? Because we didn't anticipate October 7th and we didn't anticipate October 8th. Right? We didn't anticipate it, and here we are. What's the next thing are we not anticipating? What aren't we anticipating? And it's very, very worrisome when the educational apparatus is being it looks like it's going to be utilized to kind of shove anti-Semitism down people's throats and teach a whole new generation of people how to be are what logic to use to normalize their anti-Semitism. Because that's what they're trying to do at the end of the day, right? It's not just spread anti-Semitism. It's to normalize it in a way that it becomes social justice. Right. And so when you can say this evil is needed for a good, we could look back at history. That hasn't gone well for us.
What are your hopes for the Black and Jewish communities in terms of healing and solidarity? Because obviously we have seen, a major rupture, especially when Black Lives Matter, posted the paragliders coming down and almost like celebrating October 7th. So, and I think there's a group think on campuses, like you were saying, there's just so much like I wouldn't be part of this group, which is social justice, which we know is not. So what are your hopes for the Black and Jewish communities? We've always been so close. So now, what are your thoughts?
Yes, we've been so close, right? I remember, I think one of the books I read sometime was talking about just referencing like all the people who were like so many people were getting arrested with Martin Luther King, right? And they were in the jails and all that, right? And so many people were wearing yarmulkes and they started climbing freedom hats, right? Like Jews have been playing a part of the civil rights movement and trying to help the Black community throughout the struggle, right? Particularly in the 60s, right? Co-founded NAACP and so many things. So I do not want Jews to be pulling back from having thriving relationships with the Black community or particular individuals and organizations of the Black community. This problem, this sort of militancy, this sort of I hate anybody that's connected to power or maybe based on the color was starting to rise even when Dr. Martin Luther King was around, right? That's why he is a famous quote. Essentially, it says, when you're talking about Zionists, you mean Jews, right? You're talking about anti-Semitism. He's seen it. Right. He was right there. He's seen it. Right. That had nothing to do with settlers opening up settlements or Bibi Netanyahu as being the reason that all this is happening. Right. It's not, you can't point to this for your justification. So he's seen it. So I also see that one, we were able to have such a great thriving relationship and help for the betterment of all, because I think the betterment, lifting up people who are marginalized, generally speaking, benefits us all. And also, there doesn't have to be an animosity and hatred, which I think, I don't think it's ubiquitous. I don't think it's pervasive throughout all the Black community about the Philadelphia Jews. I feel for a lot of it is not having any sort of direct relationships with Jews, right? I think more so than anything that influences everything. It's harder to hate people that you know. It's easier to hate people that you don't know. I do on an individual level, and not saying like this is something that can be extrapolated and that's going to solve the problem. But I take very much pride in my Jewish identity and I don't hide it. And I connect and I try to do the good that I do in my job and work as a Jew, not somebody that's hiding it in my work profession as a Jew. That's the only as a Jew thing that I like, not as a Jew. This is why I hate Israel or whatever, right? To tokenize these as a Jews, which I think is a form of is a form of racism in itself, right? To lift up the tokenized voices that only parrot what you believe in, and that's the only Jews' voices worth hearing, right?
Yeah.
I could go on a tangent.
Oh my God, Yehudah. So, I'm just putting together everything you said today, which is so much. So let's see if I can do it in a way that's doing justice with everything. Empathy, listen, humanize people, use your identity to bring people together, fight the fight, and explain to other people what's happening. No, don't just move away from the conversation. Ask the questions in order to make a change. So I'm going to ask you our two last questions. What is one thing you're going to do for yourself this week for your own healing?
I will just tell you, it's kind of what I do every week. Kept it sane in these insane times, right? I go to the synagogue and I participate in my community. There is the function of sort of mindfulness and connecting with a higher power. That's definitely a function of that. But it's also when you're meeting up with people in the community 3 times a day, right? Because the Jews, we pray 3 times a day and getting involved in the community and different aspects of that, right? To me, that's just, I need it. It recharges me. It strengthens me. It helps me to continue to be resilient because I'm connecting to what kept our people vibrant and thriving for thousands of years. And that's kind of how we have this sort of connection to it. And so that's what I will do to actively participate in my healing. Yeah.
Love it. Mindfulness with connection and values. Okay. And last question, what was it like to tell your story today?
I think cathartic, right? I feel it freeing. All right, to use your word, I feel liberated. I mean, you go through life and kind of like why I felt like at home in Israel, right? Because I felt like there was a collective experience that we were understanding and connecting to. And here I feel like I'm a Jew that I only truly get heard is when I'm with my people. And that's just the unfortunate reality. Like, I don't necessarily feel like there's other spaces. There might be individuals, but I haven't been in other spaces where I am allowed to talk about the things that I have been experiencing that bother me, that are hard and difficult, and then not being immediately turned around as me having to defend myself or my people or my state or whatever it is. And that can be so draining and so tiring. But this has been liberating. This has been freeing. This has allowed me to be seen. And I appreciate any space, especially as a Jew. I appreciate any space that allows me to be seen and heard, and only as a container of empathy.
I love it. Thank you so much, Yehudah. I love your empathy. I love your voice. I love your higher brain. I'm just so grateful for you.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing what you're doing. To have the bravery and courage to decide to say, you know what? Let's be trauma informed about Jews, the Jewish experience, because Jews are just like any other human beings that are worthy of empathy.
We'd like to thank our listeners, music composer Jonathan Bargiora, sound designer Ivan Reyes, podcast advisor Donna Fazari, and special thanks to the Academic Engagement Network for their generous support. Today's episode is co-produced by Professor Susie Hess and Dr. Miri Bar Halprin. Our Stories Matter, We Will Dance Again is brought to you by Trauma Informed LA. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and at our website at traumainformedla.org. Please give us 5 stars on iTunes so more folks can have access and donate to traumainformedla.org so we can keep recording and healing through our storytelling episodes.